Hey, what's going on, guys? It's your boy, Nerd Mode On, and today I'm going to be doing the next episode of Battlefield News, a video series where I'll be talking about changes and or events within a particular Battlefield title. So without further ado, let's get started. So today we're going to be taking a look at the patch notes that went into effect for Battlefield 1 on December 13th of 2016. Now, as a result of the patch being out a few days, this has granted me the ability to see some of the alterations that have since been done to Battlefield 1, and of course, I feel confident in my assessment while giving you guys some information about some of the highlighted information that has since been done to Battlefield 1. So to start things off, let's talk about the introduction of the free DLC map known as Giant Shadow. With the massive crashed airship casting its shadow onto the battlefield, Giant Shadow brings fierce combat on the open grounds and riverbanks alongside a railway. Now, of course, on Giant Shadow, you do have the ability to fight in the shadow of a crashed giant behemoth. And lastly, we also get to see the armored train making a return in this DLC, considering that the crashed behemoth unfortunately is not fully functional. Now, this free DLC has since been available since December 13th of 2016 for pre-order and premium pass consumers. Now, if you decided to not pre-order Battlefield 1 or didn't purchase the premium pass, of course you will still have the ability to play on Giant Shadow starting on December 20th. Now, moving right along, of course we do get to see the implementation of spectator mode making its appearance into Battlefield 1. Of course, previously we had it in Battlefield 4, and this was a content producer's wet dream when it came down to creating cinematics. Now, for some of you that are maybe uninitiated to what spectator mode is for the Battlefield series, in spectator, players will be able to join a live Battlefield 1 match as an observer. From there, observers will be able to switch between first-person and third-person camera views of all players on the battlefield through our player view mode. Get an overhead bird's-eye view of the battlefield in tabletop mode, or fly a camera through the world using free cam mode. So when it really comes down to it, spectator mode has made its way into Battlefield 1. Again, I'm sure content creators will rejoice at the scene of this particular feature re-entering the Battlefield series. But it is worth noting that spectator mode does promote other players to view additional players on the battlefield to verify that they are or are not cheating. So of course this will be exclusively beneficial to DICE when it comes down to verifying and validating claims made by players. Now, with that being said, of course we do get to see the adoption of a new game mode being labeled Standard Issue Rifles. The premises of this game mode is to give all kits are granted to their fraction standard issue rifle. For example, if you are the British, you'll be granted with the SMLE Mark III. Now, of course, while these rifles are not going to be equipped with optics, they do intend players to get a little bit more inspired by the World War I trench combat that was accustomed during World War I. All in all, this game mode promises players that were looking for a traditional World War I setting to have the ability to play Battlefield 1 in the aspects that they were hoping for when the game was first advertised. Now, moving right along, let's talk a little bit about some movement adjustments when it comes down to players' input as well as the movement of their character on the battlefield. DICE has made several fixes and tweaks to the controls and input handling for the soldier experience. Now, while most of these were bug fixes, this should generally allow a higher responsiveness of individual players on the level. This includes fixing the inability to sprint out of crouch and prone in certain situations and fixing an issue with toggle zoom. Now, alongside that, there has also been an update when it comes down to the controller aim assist system for Battlefield 1 on the console platforms. DICE now requires the player to be more actively giving aiming input in order for the aim assist to properly work. It was possible in some previous cases to get help on a target when simply strafing past them, which was unintentional. Now, moving right along, let's talk about some vehicle-specific changes. Now, this update includes some new additional logic to address the problem of spawning in as a tank, pilot, and or cavalry soldier without your mount. They've also made some fixes that should prevent players from getting the incorrect kit when spawning into a vehicle. For example, spawning as a cavalry soldier when spawning into a tank. So when it really comes down to it, you should be a little bit more likely to get the proper kit, especially when spawning into a vehicle or some sort of mount. So ultimately, this should enhance the overall experience and decrease the frustrations that some players were feeling when trying to select an individual vehicle. Now, alongside these adjustments, the land ship has also seen some alterations from its original value, considering that it was underrepresented in the gameplay. DICE wanted to enhance the role of the tank as a team play vehicle, as well as give it additional incentives for tank drivers to pick up and play as the landship. The biggest change here is the ability to allow teammates to spawn into the landship directly like they do in the heavy tank today. Ultimately, this should keep the landship full of teammates and in a way make it a far more effective vehicle in the end. Now moving right along, let's talk a little bit about line of sight. DICE has went in and added a head glitching style fix for vehicles that prevents players from shooting over objects that blocks the weapon's line of sight. Previously in Battlefield 4, this has been resolved, but somehow it made its way back into Battlefield 1, so of course it's nice to notice that third person and first person are going to be a lot more fixed in terms of what players can actually see. Now it is yet to be seen if first person will become the norm. I do imagine that third person will continually still be the norm for a lot of tank drivers, considering that there is a lot of stuff in Battlefield 1 that can still do significant damage to players, and of course third person does give you a little bit more viewing angles. Now last but not least, when it comes down to this section, they've also reduced the rank and dart damage against planes, considering that they did way too much damage to bombers and ultimately any of the air vehicles that you happen to fire them at. Now moving right along, let's quickly talk about some weapon specific changes, considering that this patch did make some big changes when it came down to the balancing of specific weapons. So starting things off, shotguns have been balanced and addressed in this specific update. The primary goal was to even out the advantages and disadvantages of each type of shotgun. DICE noticed that some shotguns were unintentionally strong at certain distances, most obvious the Model A10 Hunter and the factory variant, which could kill a full health target at long range. To balance this out, they made the M97 trench gun more attractive and added an extra pellet to all variants and slightly improved the damage drop-off of the sweeper variant. The backboard shotgun variants had their range improved, as previously you took too big of a penalty to your accuracy. DICE has also increased the accuracy of the 12-gauge automatic to allow users to make use of its high rate of fire. Now in conjunction with all shotguns, they have also tweaked the crosshairs, which will make it a little bit easier to land your damage consistently for all shotguns across the board. All in all, this patch to the shotguns was very expected, considering that the Model A10 variants were extremely powerful and borderline overpowered when it came down to their effective range, but ultimately I do imagine the shotguns will see a lot of alterations during the lifespan of Battlefield 1. Now moving right along, light machine guns have seen adjustments that were made to have the light machine gun performance much more consistent at close to medium range. Now alongside that, players using a bayonet now have the ability to perform a bayonet charge while reloading or when out of ammo with their primary weapon. The reload will be aborted if the player has still rounds in the magazine. If the weapon is empty, the reload will restart automatically at the end of the charge. Now in addition to those changes, we've also seen that flares no longer set players on fire immediately after firing them while looking down. An extremely controversial change has been that there has been a fix for the Martini Henry dealing too much damage to most body parts. It has since been adjusted to a 0.9 multiplier to the lower torso and upper arms and a 0.75 multiplier to the legs and forearms, like the other rifles with the sweet spot mechanism. When it comes down to the Martini Henry, there definitely seems to be a disconnect between what was previously a glitch as well as what the community deems to be a skillful weapon when it comes down to what they believe the weapon should be able to do at medium to long range. It will definitely be interesting to see if DICE decides to revert back on the Martini Henry, considering that the uproar by the community over the last couple of days has been pretty sufficient, but of course it'll be interesting to see if they stick by their guns, and I'm interested to see ultimately what will happen to the Martini Henry in terms of its damage. Now this wouldn't be a patch note without the ability for the Hellriggle to see further degradation of its overall performance, so of course this time around we do get to see that the Hellriggle does have increased first shot recoil multiplier, increasing by 0.2. Now alongside that, the Hellriggle has also had an increase in its horizontal recoil from 0.76 to 0.8, so of course there has been slight adjustments to the Hellriggle, but overall it's definitely still being deemed as an overpowered weapon by the community. Now moving right along, let's quickly talk about some gadgets, considering that this time around DICE reverted back to a previous model that they had when the game first came out, as well as a new implementation of how to resolve an issue deemed by the community. DICE has reduced some of the inaccuracy penalties that were previously added to the mortars in the last update. Mortars will now be more accurate when placed and slightly more accurate during sustained fire. Now it is worth noting that the damage amounts remain unchanged, so of course you're still going to have to be accurate in order to kill players, but of course this will grant you the ability to spam the mortars a little bit more than you were previously able to. Now in addition to these changes, hardcore players will now get the ability to use the large map for aiming indirect fire weapons. In correlation with the large map, spotted players will no longer show on the map unless minimap spotting is enabled in custom games. Now transferring over to the syringe, DICE has added a short cooldown between syringe uses and added the ability to ignore the cooldown if near an ammo crate. Together, this allows a medic and a support player to team up and quickly revive a large amount of soldiers. When it really comes down to it, this should make the syringes a little bit less spammy when it came down to picking up a large amount of soldiers by an individual player, but of course this will definitely add a new team aspect that was previously missing from Battlefield 1. Now last but not least, let's quickly talk about some alterations done to the gameplay. Monte Grappa, Suez, Ballroom Blitz, and Argonne Forest have had tweaks done to certain areas of the map where attackers had a very difficult time capturing specific sectors. DICE has fixed rubber banding issues and non-smooth movement of airplanes and multiplayer. They have also reworked how the Behemoth enters the map in Operations Game Mode. The Behemoth will no longer appear if the team is in a significant lead. This affects both attackers and defenders in the Operations Game Mode. Defenders will no longer get a Behemoth on a new level if attackers are on their last battalion. And last but certainly not least, the mortar can no longer be deployed on bushes. But anyway guys, that's really all the information I have for you. Of course I will leave the article linked in the description of the video for your viewing pleasure. But until the next episode guys, this has been NMO, and I'm going to be signing out guys. Peace!